sort of change the flow of my presentation a little bit to just build on the notion of rekindling the human spirit, and also Arnold's other idea of a different paradigm, because it's my sense that when we talk about leadership, we're really talking about that, because leadership is an influencing process, and it's an influencing process where you must use yourself in order to influence others. It's also a process where you really want to touch other people. And in order to touch other people, you need to be real, you need to be authentic, you need to be as honest as possible. Because that engagement, that rekindling the human spirit, that engagement with other people in order to influence them, is really about the realm of the soul. So it's very much about that, and it is a different paradigm. But I feel for us in South Africa and for us in the world, it is about being responsible leaders. It is about being transformational leaders. Now, we need to be the other things as well. There are times that we need to be authoritative. There are times that we need to coach. There are times that we need to be affiliative, develop relationships with others. There are times that we sometimes need to be coercive, that we need to tell people what to do. So we need to know all the other styles of leadership. But I think a major challenge for us as South Africans is to be responsible leaders and also to be transformational leaders. Leadership must start with ourselves. We must be the change that we want to see in the world. So for us to bring about leadership, we need to start with ourselves, but we need to start with ourselves at the level of our values. What are our values? And then what's the gap between our values and our behavior? Secondly, particularly in South Africa, we need to be mindful. Where are we as a nation? What are our particular challenges as a nation? The one challenge that I think is we're in the process of becoming a nation. We've never really been a nation before, right? So it's my sense that in South Africa, a major challenge for us is the challenge of creating community, which is the first step in creating a different nation. I find in the work that I do that, and also in reading up on the thing that changes us, that brings about that personal level transformation, which is the first level of the transformation, is honest conversations with each other. And honest conversations, they also call a dialogue, but it's a context of honest conversations with people who come from different backgrounds, and that's important. That there's differences, particularly in South Africa, that differences are represented in the group. And then we start speaking honestly about each other. Because in those honest conversations, we start getting in touch with our own humanity by telling our own stories, and also listening to the stories of others and become to accept their humanity. Because it's my sense that we come from a very fractured past. And we come from a very divided past. And we continue to have very fractured and divided experiences. And also the knowledge that we've been exposed to is also fractured and divided. So I think often when we speak about issues, it's often then that we come at these issues from different perspectives. Therefore, I think it's essential that we create spaces in our places of work where we can talk honestly with each other, and where we as leaders either play a facilitative role of managing that conversation without putting yourself outside of the process, perhaps by starting to tell your stories. I also think in South Africa we made a commitment to ourselves, and part of it was CODESA and the conversations that happened before and after, that we will reconcile our differences. So we will acknowledge these different pasts and these different experiences, but that we would reconcile those differences. That was a commitment we made. And the TRC was sort of one of the instruments of facilitating that. But the TRC was hugely inadequate really to create community and to create a nation. But it was the formula that we agreed to. And I feel all of us are really reneging on that. There's sort of an assumption that this has been done. Sometimes we struggle so when we listen to people and their experience. One, we struggle just creating environments for people to talk about their past. We have this notion that the past is in the past. For many of us, the past is very much in the present. I mean, many people's lives haven't changed that dramatically, or the consequences of what happened to the past continues to be part of our lives. It's only those of us who are willing to remember will be granted the opportunity to forget. So it is sort of a funny thing about the past. By speaking about the past, we usually lay it to rest. And you usually find by speaking about that, you then move on. If we become friends, it'll be helpful for us to tell our stories. Yeah? And I want to hear from you as a white guy, what's your experience been? And, you know, how do you see things? And all of that. But once we've done that, we can then move on. If we don't do that, it's like there's a body in the middle of the room. The last thing about reconciliation is reparation, which I think is a very difficult thing for us. And this current government also reneged on it. But reconciliation does need to tie in with reparation. I mean, if I do something wrong and I say I'm sorry, and it's something that I can then give you back what I stole, or, yeah, then I need to repair the damage to the extent that it's possible. And so I do think that we need to take our commitment to reconciliation seriously. And again, as leaders, think, what does that mean? What does that mean in my particular environment? Then the whole thing of healing. It's often said, and I really believe, that colonialism, apartheid, have harmed us all. Just on one simple level, we were sold a bill of goods. I was told I'm less than, I'm not competent enough, I'm not capable enough. And on some level, I don't know whether I believed it, but sometimes I act on that assumption that I'm not as smart, that I'm not as... And sometimes I still struggle with what we call internalized oppression, where I still, when Arnold was speaking a moment ago, I really got into a panic. I thought, wow, these guys are so brilliant, what can I say? So, and I think there's such sort of vestiges of internalized oppression that I assume all black folks have. Sometimes sort of a sense of self-doubt. I don't want your answers. Or that women have, or that those of us who grew up poor have. You know, all of us who have been targeted at some point as less than. That sort of, on some point, we believe that message. And we sometimes then act on that message. And if you think of that, it's a whole lot of us. And I think internalized oppression is one of our major challenges in South Africa. I know that's a fairly serious assumption I'm making, that we have all been harmed by our past, and therefore there's a need for healing. And us as leaders, therefore, not only need to be responsible leaders, but we also need to be compassionate leaders. And not only compassionate with others, but also compassionate with ourselves, because we are part of the context. We're not separate from it. I think another context of our reality in South Africa, and this reality that we are leaders in, is the high level of poverty and just the severity of poverty and just the human suffering. A couple of assumptions I make. One is that all of us need to define these concepts in ways that make sense for us. For example, transformation. Transformation is sort of a multi-level concept. You could, in each of our organizations, we can think what are the relevant elements of transformation in our organization. So it's a composite concept, and it's also a multi-level concept. Now, one level, as I sort of implied, is we are moving from a colonial apartheid society to a non-racist, non-sexist, inclusive, constitutional democracy. And that particular transformation is sort of also embodied in the Constitution with the values that Dani and the others alluded to the values of human dignity, of respect, of equality, of freedom. So the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and before that the Freedom Charter, are sort of the documents that's embodying our vision for South Africa. But in order to make that a reality, we as leaders must engage in these processes, in these transformation processes, to genuinely move away from colonialism, apartheid. I think it very much consistent with this theme, it's a huge challenge for us really to be inclusive. And really to include, particularly in our places of work, really to include the different knowledges, the different people we have, the different knowledges we have, the different perspectives we have. I worked with one of the retail companies in Cape Town, and they had a lot of concern. They wanted to open a store in Soweto, but there was a lot of concern at exco level about doing that. In that particular setting, there was one black woman, and we encouraged them to consult broadly within their organization and particularly see what are the African black people saying about this idea. They did that, and of course they have stores there now. They have stores in other places too, and the stores are doing very well. So sometimes we don't realize we try to make decisions for people without really including those people. And we are not utilizing all the resources, all the knowledge that we have available to us. And incidentally, it's usually the majority of people who are excluded. Once you include, how do we validate, how do we empower, how do we create these environments that everybody feels validated and honored? So how do we create that type of organizational culture? Again, as an integral part of creating community and creating a different type of nation. Perhaps I want to stop on just a last point I had somewhere on hope and action. As I said earlier, our Constitution, Jeff Butlender, a judge who was also a student leader at my time, he wrote a beautiful piece on our Constitution as a transformational, as a aspirational document. You know, some constitutions, they call them triumphalist. They sort of say, we are this. Now, our Constitution is aspirational. It's what we want to become as a nation, as a people. And therefore, the whole concept of hope is very much part of it. This whole process of transformation is also aspirational. It's what we want to create. And therefore, we need to have hope. We need to hope that we can achieve that. And then with the hope, there need to be action, and there need to be strategies and plans. We need hope. We need to hope for a better society. And then we need to tie action and plans in order to realize that hope. But with hope, and you sometimes hear that in conversations, without hope we become cynical. Yeah? We become sort of a sense of hopelessness. And we don't really have the expectation that the current leaders can take us in the direction we want to go. And I would think if it's only on them, we won't get there. It really depends on all of us. And I like Havel's thing about the ex-Czechoslovakia president who was asked, are you an optimist? And he said, I'm not an optimist because I don't believe everything is going to turn out well. But I'm not a pessimist either. I don't believe everything is going to turn out poorly. But I have hope. And hope is important as life itself. And therefore, I think we're fortunate at Stellenbosch and at USB to have a vice-chancellor who pins his pedagogy on a pedagogy of hope.